Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and felt something shift, not because of what they said, not because of anything obvious, but because something deeper beneath the smile, beneath the charm, felt wrong? It's that strange moment when your heart pulls back and your body whispers, "This isn't safe." They may seem kind, even spiritual, but something is off. You feel it not with your mind, but with your soul. Carl Jung called this the most dangerous signal in a human being. Not anger, not violence, but a quiet, invisible distortion that only the heart can detect. It often hides behind perfection, behind polished words, and practiced empathy, behind a mask they've worn so long they don't even know it's there. In this journey, we'll walk through 8 signs Jung warned us about, from shadow projection to ego inflation to the tragic repetition of old wounds that quietly shape our lives. Have you ever been caught in someone else's chaos while all you wanted was connection? Have you ever been misjudged, as if you were playing a role you never agreed to? And maybe, just maybe, you've worn a mask so long you forgot there was ever a face beneath it. This isn't a video about other people. It's a mirror to reflect the places within us we were told to hide, to touch the silence we once knew as sacred. So take a slow breath, feel your feet on the floor, and listen not with your mind, but with whatever still remembers who you were before the world told you who to be. Because sometimes the greatest danger isn't what we can see, but what we've been trained not to look at. Let's begin. Sometimes danger doesn't announce itself. It doesn't slam doors. It doesn't raise its voice. Instead, it smiles. It listens. It tells you everything you want to hear. And yet, your breath shortens, your chest tightens, and your body whispers, "Something's wrong." This is what Carl Jung called a silent signal. Not a threat of the body, but a threat to the soul. The people who trigger this feeling rarely seem dangerous. They might be charming, highly intelligent, even spiritual or healing in their words. But what your intuition picks up is not their words. It's what's missing behind them. Jung believed that our instincts, the ancient, pre-verbal parts of us, can sense energetic contradictions when someone's outer expression and inner truth do not match. We feel it, even if we can't explain it. Modern neuroscience supports this. Our brains contain mirror neurons, tiny, intuitive circuits that pick up on micro-expressions, tone, and subtle mismatches between how someone looks and what they truly feel. It's the reason a conversation can feel off, even when nothing wrong is said. It's the reason we sometimes walk away from a seemingly kind person, feeling strangely drained, confused, or disturbed. So what are we sensing? In Jung's terms, we may be sensing a deep split within the person, a separation between the image they show and the truth they hide, not just from the world, but from themselves. This is where danger begins. Not because they're bad, but because they are not whole. And when someone is not whole, when they've denied parts of themselves long enough, those rejected parts begin to seep out, not as whispers, but as shadows cast onto the people around them. That is where we go next. But before we continue, pause for a moment. Can you recall a time when someone made you feel uneasy and you didn't know why? Did you listen to that instinct? Or did you silence it in the name of being kind, open, or loving? Sometimes our deepest wisdom comes wrapped in discomfort, and the greatest act of self-love is to trust it. There's a strange moment when someone looks at you, but you sense they're not really seeing you. It's as if you've become a character in a story they've already written, a villain, an enemy, a threat to something deep within them. Even when you try to clarify, to reassure, to explain yourself, nothing gets through, because the story they're seeing was never about you in the first place. Carl Jung named this ancient pattern shadow projection. The shadow is the part of ourselves we reject, deny, or bury deep. It holds everything we've learned to call unacceptable, ugly, or wrong: anger, jealousy, shame, weakness, even power, brilliance, or sensuality. If those things once brought us pain, rather than face these disowned parts within, we cast them outward onto someone else. We see in them what we cannot bear to see in ourselves. Have you ever been accused of something you didn't say, didn't feel, didn't intend, and yet the person accusing you seemed absolutely convinced, as if they were describing a version of you that never existed? You were likely experiencing a raw moment of shadow projection. In that moment, you're no longer speaking to a person. You're speaking to their wound, to the parts they cannot look at without fear, shame, or collapse. And so they place it onto you and then feel justified in their reaction. This is why it feels so confusing, so violating, so heavy. You haven't done anything wrong, and yet you're being treated like the embodiment of someone else's darkness. And worse, others might believe their version of you, because when shadow is projected with enough emotional conviction, it becomes contagious. The story spreads, and soon you're left not only defending your truth, but doubting it. Ancient spiritual traditions knew this long before Jung put it into words. In Buddhism, they speak of the darkened mirror, the tendency to see one's own impurities as if they belonged to another. In Christianity, Jesus warned of the man who fixates on the speck in his brother's eye while ignoring the beam in his own. In every wisdom path, the lesson is the same. What we cannot see in ourselves, we are doomed to fight in others. So what can we do when we become the screen for someone else's shadow? The first step is to stop taking it personally. It isn't about you. Even if it's aimed at you, what you're witnessing is a person at war with themselves, a battle they may not even know they're fighting. You just happen to be standing in the crossfire. The second step is to honor your own knowing, to not explain yourself endlessly, to not contort your truth just to fit into their version of reality. Trust the discomfort, honor your boundary, and, if needed, walk away not with bitterness, but with clarity. You are not here to carry someone else's darkness just because they refuse to hold it. But here's the harder truth. We all have a shadow, and if we don't want to become like the very people who've projected onto us, we must turn inward too. Ask yourself gently, what parts of me do I struggle to accept? When was the last time I saw someone else's behavior and overreacted? The shadow lives not in our flaws, but in our refusal to own them. Carl Jung once said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. It's not a call to blame the self, but an invitation to deepen our awareness. The more we recognize our own shadow, the less we need to cast it, and the less vulnerable we are to being caught in the projections of others. This is the first door on the path of inner freedom, to see clearly what is ours, what is theirs, and what belongs to the silence we've never dared to touch. Are you willing to look into your own mirror, even if what stares back isn't easy to love at first? The next part of our journey leads to a deeper illusion, the spiritualized self-image that hides its shadow behind the mask of light. Let's go there. Sometimes the most dangerous people aren't the ones who yell or lie or manipulate openly. Sometimes they're the ones who truly believe they're saving you. Carl Jung warned about a condition more dangerous than arrogance, more seductive than power. He called it ego inflation. It happens when the small, ordinary self, the I that doubts, learns, and grows, becomes identified with something much greater, a God, a truth, a divine mission. When that happens, the person no longer sees themselves as human. They become, in their own eyes, a channel of light, a spiritual authority, a bearer of ultimate truth. And from that place, they can justify anything. You may have met this person before, the self-proclaimed healer, the spiritual teacher, the activist who says they act only from love, but leaves destruction in their wake. To disagree with them feels not like a conversation, but like blasphemy. Your hesitation isn't seen as discernment. It's seen as resistance to the light. Your discomfort, a sign that you are unhealed, unawakened, not ready. This is the trap Jung called psychic inflation. Unlike ordinary egotism, which is usually easy to spot and roll your eyes at, inflation is harder to detect because it hides behind virtue. It speaks in beautiful language. It quotes scripture and science. It may even bring temporary healing. But beneath the surface, something has gone terribly wrong. The person is no longer grounded. They've merged their identity with an archetype, a spiritual symbol so powerful, so ancient, that it erases the fragile boundaries of their humanity. They are no longer John or Emily or David. They are the messenger, the redeemer, the one who knows. And when someone believes they know the truth, all of it, absolutely, they are no longer capable of listening or doubting or seeing the impact they're actually having. Zen teachers have long warned of this. They call it Zen sickness, a spiritual pride that arises when one has touched a higher state, but has not yet integrated the shadow beneath it. The Sufis called it the veil of light, more dangerous than darkness, because it looks like truth, but blinds like illusion. Christian mystics, too, spoke of it. Meister Eckhart warned that the closer we get to the divine, the more humble we must become, because the light without grounding becomes fire. And here's the most terrifying part. The inflated ego often gathers followers. Why? Because we, too, are hungry for certainty, for meaning, for someone who seems to know when we feel lost. Their conviction feels like safety. Their confidence feels like truth. And so we follow, sometimes into wisdom, but often into confusion, guilt, or dependence. So how do you recognize ego inflation? You'll feel it in their reaction to disagreement. Push back just a little and see what happens. A grounded person welcomes honest feedback. An inflated one, they collapse, or attack, or guilt trip, or double down in the name of teaching you a lesson, because in their mind, they're not expressing an opinion. They're delivering a universal truth, and truth, to them, cannot be questioned. But the real danger isn't just to others, it's to themselves, because psychic inflation creates unbearable inner pressure. The more they identify with the light, the more violently the shadow must be denied. And when the shadow eventually erupts, as it always does, it comes with shame, collapse, sometimes even destruction. Jung wrote, "The brighter the persona, the darker the shadow." So pause for a moment. Have you ever trusted someone who seemed so certain, only to realize later they were acting out a role they didn't even see? Have you ever felt tempted to believe your insight, your love, your purpose was so strong, so sacred, that it made you unshakably right? We all carry seeds of inflation. It is not a moral failure. It is a spiritual crossroad. One path leads to humility, the other to illusion. The next step on our journey is even more subtle. It's the face we show the world, the image so polished, so perfect, that it becomes a prison made of light. Let's look behind the mask. We all wear masks. It's part of being human. We put on smiles when we're hurting. We say I'm fine when we're falling apart. We learn how to be likable, polite, professional, and that's not always wrong. Sometimes it's even necessary. But what happens when the mask becomes the only face we remember? Carl Jung called this public image, the persona, the role we play to survive in the world. The good daughter, the strong provider, the kind neighbor, the spiritual seeker, the high achiever who always has it together. We wear it so long, we forget we were ever anything else. You may have met someone like this, perfectly composed, says the right thing, at the right time, with the right tone. They're agreeable, smooth, maybe even inspiring, but after a while, you notice something, you leave the conversation, feeling tired, not emotionally full, but drained in a way you can't explain. It's as if you weren't speaking to a person, but to a performance. Jung warned that when the persona becomes too rigid, too polished, too complete, it begins to replace the soul, and behind the smile, there is silence, not the sacred kind, but the kind that signals something important has gone missing. Why is this so dangerous? Because when a person becomes completely identified with their social role, they begin to disown their own humanity. They split away from their mess, their vulnerability, their contradictions, and in doing so, they also lose their depth, their warmth, their unpredictability, everything that makes a soul feel real. Over time, this split creates a terrifying consequence. The more perfect the persona, the more chaotic the shadow. Everything they've buried, grief, rage, envy, fear, doesn't disappear. It grows in the dark, unseen, unfelt, until one day it breaks through the seams, and when it does, it often surprises everyone, even them. Marie-Louise von Franz, Jung's close collaborator, observed that people with perfect social masks often experience moments of psychological rupture. They might lash out unexpectedly, sabotage a relationship, make a reckless decision, completely out of character. But it's not out of character. It's the shadow, finally demanding to be seen. Think of it like a sealed pressure cooker. The more tightly you lock the lid, the more violently it explodes. When the pressure builds too high, the mask may protect the world from the person's chaos, but it does nothing to protect the person from themselves. So how do we recognize when we're engaging with a persona instead of a person? Listen closely. There will be no contradictions, no messy edges, no emotional spontaneity. They say all the right things, but you don't feel them. Not really. The laugh doesn't quite reach the eyes. The kindness feels rehearsed. The conversation leaves no echo inside you. Neuroscience tells us that our brains are wired to detect incongruence. We have mirror neurons that pick up the tiniest mismatch between words and feeling, tone and expression. That's why you feel uneasy, even when someone seems nice, because the energy doesn't match the image. And here's the part that hurts. Most people don't even know. They've lost themselves in the mask. They learned early, maybe as children, that authenticity came with punishment. That being too much, too sensitive, too emotional was dangerous. So they did the wise thing. They hid. They adapted. They became what others needed. And slowly, they disappeared. But behind every perfect mask is a soul that longs to be touched, to be seen in its realness, not in its perfection. The danger is not in the mask itself, but in forgetting that it is a mask. So pause here. Close your eyes if you want to. Ask gently, what role have I played so long that I've forgotten who I was before it? When was the last time someone saw my truth and I didn't hide it? These are not easy questions, but they are the beginning of something sacred, because when we remove the mask, even for a moment, the soul begins to breathe again. In the next part, we'll meet something even more unsettling. Not a mask, not a persona, but a force so ancient and powerful, it can possess the human psyche, not metaphorically, but psychologically, spiritually, and in ways you might already have seen. Let's go deeper. There are moments when someone looks at you, and they are still physically there. Same eyes, same voice, same face. But something has changed. You can feel it. Their energy hardens. Their gaze becomes fixed. Their words no longer flow from emotion. They descend like proclamations. It's no longer a person you're speaking to. It's a symbol. Carl Jung called this rare and dangerous state archetypal possession, when a person loses touch with their individual self and becomes overtaken by a larger-than-life psychic force that doesn't belong to them. What is an archetype? It's not just a personality type. It's an ancient pattern that lives in the collective human psyche. The warrior, the savior, the martyr, the judge, the eternal child, the prophet, the victim. Each one holds immense psychic energy, both light and shadow, courage or violence, compassion or delusion, wisdom or tyranny. When someone unconsciously merges with one, they don't just act like it, they become it. In that moment, they stop being Sarah or Michael or David the accountant or Rachel the teacher. They become the warrior fighting injustice, the redeemer who must wake the world, the victim whom no one ever understands. And once fully identified with this pattern, they lose the ability to see nuance, to question themselves, to change, because now they are no longer speaking from their voice, but from a collective myth. You'll feel it in the strange certainty they carry, the unshakable conviction, the absence of personal doubt. Their language becomes grand, their emotions absolute, and their presence intimidating. Even when soft-spoken, you might feel like you're in the presence of something larger than human, but not necessarily benevolent. Spiritual and shamanic traditions have spoken of this for millennia. In some indigenous cultures, shamans undergo intentional possessions within sacred space so that the archetype can move through them, but not stay. The danger begins when the person doesn't come back, when there is no container, no grounding, no one home behind the eyes. Meister Eckhart, the Christian mystic, warned of the soul being overwhelmed by a spiritual image, so bright it becomes blinding. Zen teachings speak of losing the original face, when we forget who we were before we tried to become anything at all. Jung observed that archetypal possession often occurs in people with unmet spiritual longings, who reach for meaning so desperately that they mistake an idea for the self. And once the merge happens, something tragic follows. They become incapable of relationship, because archetypes do not relate. They declare, they demand, they divide. They are timeless forces, but we are not meant to live inside them. So how do you know you're encountering someone possessed by an archetype? You'll feel it in the loss of flexibility. They cannot entertain your viewpoint, only convert you to theirs. They speak in absolutes, black or white, light or dark, with us or against us. There's no curiosity, no softness, no humanness left, just a role, on repeat. And what's worse, archetypal possession often inspires loyalty, because we're all drawn to symbols. We want to follow heroes, believe in prophets, stand beside warriors, and when someone embodies one convincingly, we mistake it for depth, when it's often just disconnection. But the deepest danger isn't to you, it's to them, because to be overtaken by an archetype is to carry energy that the nervous system cannot sustain. The weight is too much, the identity too rigid. The fall, when it comes, can be catastrophic. Depression, collapse, spiritual fragmentation, or sudden, inexplicable acts that betray everything they once claimed to stand for. Jung wrote, "Possession is a state of being where the individual loses the capacity for self-reflection." That's the line. The loss of inner mirror, of personal accountability, of the humble truth. I am not the whole. I am only a part. So pause with me, gently. Can you recall someone in your life who suddenly changed, not in the body, but in energy? Did they begin speaking with authority that felt too big? Did they start seeing enemies where there were none? Did they lose the ability to laugh at themselves? And perhaps more importantly, have you ever caught yourself slipping into a role so completely that you forgot to breathe? We all carry archetypes, but we are meant to dance with them, not become them. The next part of our journey will take us into something more subtle, but equally haunting. Not possession by myth, but repetition of trauma, a hidden script, so old and familiar that many live their whole lives inside it, without ever knowing it was never theirs. Let's look at the loop that pulls us back into the pain we thought we had left behind. Some people don't change, not because they don't want to, but because something deeper inside them is running the show. Again and again, they find themselves in the same kind of heartbreak, the same betrayals, the same disappointments, just with different names, different faces, different settings, but the story, it's always the same. Carl Jung called this the compulsion to repeat, a hidden pattern in the unconscious that pulls a person back into familiar pain until it's made conscious. It is not a choice. It is not weakness. It is not fate. It is a wound that hasn't found its voice. Imagine the mind like a scratched vinyl record. Each time the song tries to move forward, it jumps back to the place it got damaged. That's what trauma does. It freezes time, freezes the nervous system, freezes the story, and the person lives not in the present, but in a loop. What's so dangerous about this? Because when someone is caught in a repetition loop, they don't just recreate their pain, they recruit others to play roles in it. You may have felt this before. You meet someone. There's an immediate spark, a connection that feels strangely intense, like you've known them forever, like something ancient is waking up. But soon, you're confused. You're walking on eggshells. You're being pulled into situations you never asked for, and somehow you've become a character in a story that isn't yours. Jungian analysts call this negative synchronicity, when the unconscious seeks not healing, but reenactment. The person doesn't intend to hurt you, but their pain demands a stage, and without knowing it, you've stepped into their script. You might be cast as the betrayer, the abandoner, the parent who never came back, the lover who couldn't stay, even if none of those things are true for you. And here's the most heartbreaking part. They're not lying. They truly believe it. Because trauma warps memory. It warps meaning. It bends reality to make old pain feel familiar, even if it's not real. Modern neuroscience confirms this. Early experiences, especially traumatic ones, create neurological grooves, paths of least resistance, for how we interpret the world. And the brain, like an old radio, keeps tuning in to the same frequency of pain, not because it enjoys suffering, but because it's trying to complete something that was never allowed to finish. This is why people say, why do I always end up with the same kind of person? Why does this keep happening to me? It's not the universe punishing you. It's not bad luck. It's a subconscious pull toward a familiar script that the soul is still trying to rewrite. So what can you do if you realize you're inside someone else's loop? The first step is to step out of the role. You don't have to play the villain in someone else's healing drama. You don't have to become the proof they were betrayed again. You can walk away with love, with compassion, with boundaries that protect your own story. And what if you recognize your own loop? Then your work is not to shame yourself. It's to listen. Listen to what your pain keeps asking for. Listen to what the story needs to finally end. Not through a perfect ending, but through awareness. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. There is something profoundly brave about looking at your pattern and saying, I see you, not blaming others, not blaming yourself, just seeing it. That is when the loop begins to loosen. That is when time starts to move again. So I ask you gently, what stories do you keep living, even when you thought you'd already healed? Do you find yourself in the same dynamic with different people? What if it isn't a coincidence, but a mirror, not to punish you, but to free you? The next part of our journey takes us to the turning point, where all this pain, all this projection, repetition, possession can begin to dissolve, not through escape, but through integration, through the quiet, humble act of turning toward your shadow and saying, you can come home now. Let's walk into the light that doesn't blind, but heals. Not everything dark is evil, and not everything light is true. Sometimes the parts of us we've rejected, the anger, the grief, the fear, even the hunger to be seen, are not enemies. They're exiled children waiting to be welcomed back into the house of the soul. Carl Jung believed that real transformation doesn't come from being good. It comes from becoming whole. Wholeness is not perfection. It's not the absence of flaws. It's the conscious embrace of our contradictions. It's the place where light and shadow are no longer enemies, but allies. This is the process of integration, the sacred work of bringing the unconscious into awareness, of meeting the parts of ourselves we were taught to fear and learning to listen, not to indulge, not to act out, but to understand, because when we understand something, we can stop fighting it. So what does integration look like in real life? It's the moment you feel anger, and instead of exploding, you pause. You trace it back to the boundary that was crossed, to the need that wasn't met, to the voice that wasn't heard. You don't pretend it's not there. You don't shame yourself. You sit beside it. And in that sitting, something sacred happens. The shadow doesn't grow stronger. It grows quieter, because finally, someone is listening. Integration is the moment. You realize you're projecting, and instead of blaming the other, you turn inward and ask, what part of me am I seeing in them? It's the moment you catch yourself repeating an old wound, and instead of spiraling, you stop. You breathe. You speak the truth you were never allowed to say. It's the moment you notice your mask and choose, just for a day, to let it fall. True integration is not glamorous. It doesn't always look enlightened. It's messy, quiet, often invisible, but over time, it changes everything. You begin to react less. You begin to respond more. You stop chasing approval. You stop fearing rejection, because you've built a home inside yourself, where even your darkest parts are allowed to exist. And neuroscience agrees. Studies show that when we consciously integrate disconnected emotional experiences, the brain literally rewires. New connections form between emotional centers and the prefrontal cortex. We gain self-regulation. We gain resilience. We gain the ability to hold complexity without breaking. In other words, we become whole, not just spiritually, but neurologically. But perhaps the most beautiful sign of integration is what it does to how we see others. You stop needing people to be perfect. You stop needing to fix them. You can hold space for their process, their confusion, even their projections, without abandoning yourself, because you no longer fear the shadow. You've made peace with your own. And this peace, this quiet humility, it's not loud. It doesn't need to prove anything, but when others are near it, they feel it. They feel safe. They feel seen. They feel free to drop their own mask, if only for a moment. So pause again. Breathe with me. Ask yourself, what part of me have I still been running from? What would happen if I turned toward it? Instead of away, who might I become if I stopped trying to be only light and allowed myself to be real? Jung once said, I'd rather be whole than good. It's one of the most misunderstood lines in all of psychology, but now you know what it means. Wholeness is not moral superiority. It's truth. It's ownership. It's the radical act of loving what once felt unlovable. In the final part of this journey, we'll look at how integration changes your presence, your relationships, your purpose, and why the people who feel safest to be around are not the ones who shine the brightest, but the ones who have made peace with their own darkness. Let's walk there, together. Not all light blinds. Some light is soft, subtle. It doesn't demand attention, but you feel it. When you're near someone who's made peace with who they are, these are not the loudest voices in the room. They're not trying to impress you. They don't need to prove they're healed, or enlightened, or always right. They're the people who can sit in silence without discomfort, who can hear pain without fixing it, who can hold your story without losing themselves in it. You feel calmer around them, more real, more honest, because their presence says, it's okay to be human here. This is the quiet power of someone who has integrated their shadow. They no longer fear their own depth, and so they don't fear yours. They've been humbled by their inner contradictions. They've met their anger, their jealousy, their fear of abandonment, and rather than shame it, they've sat with it, learned from it, loved it into wholeness, and the result, they don't react, they respond. They don't blame, they inquire. They don't dominate, they invite. Their strength isn't force, it's containment, the ability to hold intense emotions, complex truths, difficult moments, without collapsing or attacking. This is not the work of a weekend. It's the devotion of a lifetime. But every step toward integration creates ripples far beyond the self. Because once we stop running from our own darkness, we stop projecting it. We stop recruiting others into old wounds. We stop passing down the patterns we inherited unconsciously. This is how healing becomes generational, not by perfection, but by presence. You don't need a diploma, a title, or a stage to bring this into the world. Just your willingness to be honest, to be real, to do your work quietly, consistently, compassionately. In time, people around you will notice, not because you told them, but because your energy has changed. You listen differently. You hold space differently. You forgive more easily, not because others always deserve it, but because you've stopped needing enemies to feel strong. You no longer split the world into good and bad, right and wrong, us and them. You see nuance. You see wounds beneath behavior. You see the soul behind the mask. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of individuation, the journey of becoming uniquely yourself, while remaining connected to the whole, not losing your edges, but softening your armor, not eliminating darkness, but befriending it. So I ask you now, what if your presence was the medicine someone else didn't even know they needed? What if healing isn't about fixing anything, but becoming someone safe enough for truth to land in? And what if the most powerful transformation isn't something others can see, but something they feel when you walk into a room? Wholeness is not a destination. It's not the absence of pain. It's the spaciousness to hold pain, joy, fear, love, all at once, without having to push any of it away. And when you live from that place, you become someone who no longer contributes to the chaos, but becomes a calm in the middle of it. So here we are, at the end of this path, which is really just the beginning. You don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to be fearless. You only need to be willing to turn inward with honesty, curiosity, and love. Because when you do, you stop being dangerous to others and start becoming a mirror of what is possible. If this journey resonated with you, take a breath. Leave a comment below. Let me know what part spoke to your soul, and if you feel called Share this with someone who might be quietly walking their own shadow path. You never know whose mask your truth might help gently fall away. Thank you for being here. Thank you for remembering. Thank you for becoming whole. If this video touched something quiet inside you, if you saw a reflection of your own story, or understood someone else a little more deeply, just leave the letter Q in the comments. Not for a reason, not for recognition, but simply as a quiet sign that you're on the path too. A path of wholeness, of truth, of remembering. I'll be there, reading every Q, and together, in silence, we'll know we're not walking alone.